Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk about augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, and why we keep hearing so much about it, and what we predict will happen with this technology over the next few years. Hey, Dee, good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I think this is going to be an interesting topic to dive into today.
Yeah, so last night, I was going to tell you this. I tried out the augmented reality frame shopping experience with Warby Parker, and I have to say, it was pretty amazing, dude. It's kind of game changing for trying on lenses.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of technology that's been around on social platforms like Instagram and Snapchat for a while. It just kind of has like this entirely different value when you're applying it to like buying products.
Yeah, it fit in perfectly. You have the Warby Parker app. You go through, you click the frames that you want. It automatically places the frames on your face in like a really cool way, not like a cheesy way.
Hmm.
And then you can turn to the side. You can move your head up and down. You can take a picture of it. You can save it. You can compare them. And to me, it felt like exactly the same as if I was standing inside of a shop and looking in one of those little mirrors that they have, when you're
Hmm.
trying on a pair of glasses. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, this is it. Like, what's the point of driving to a mall, walking into a shop, standing there trying on frames when I can literally do this in front of me, and then I could take all these pictures, go back and look at them all. I can even send them to friends and say, like, hey, which one do you think looks best on me? It just seems like the next level shopping experience and a place where AR fits in seamlessly.
Yeah, and in some cases, even better than being in the store because you get to try out different types of lighting. A lot of times, the lighting in some of those stores are not that great.
Yeah, and that's actually what I'm going to use when I get my next pair of glasses this summer. But one of the things I wanted to address is the difference between AR, VR, and mixed reality. So this is something that has been around for a really long time. I mean, you worked in a lab at NASA where
Hmm.
you were using virtual reality for experiments, and that was back in 2003, right?
Yeah.
Based on the way that we describe it in user experience. So AR uses kind of a real world setting where VR is completely virtual. So AR is this exact idea of like taking your phone, putting it up in the real world, and then having something overlaid on it, or wearing a pair of glasses that you can see in the real world, but something gets
Hmm.
overlaid on it. Where the VR is like the immersive headset, right? You put the headset on, it blocks off the real world and takes you into a complete virtual world. Now, the other one is mixed reality, and we hear that a lot. And it's kind of a bit of a marketing term, but what it's actually doing is just merging virtual worlds with real world. And it's kind of like what Magic Leap is doing. If you're familiar with that company, where you put on the head mounted display, you can kind of see the real world, but you also have this augmented reality virtual world being projected, and you're kind of working through a game or a story or whatever the interaction is.
Hmm.
But I think most of the companies are now trying to kind of utilize that term of mixed reality, because they're playing not just with the phone, but also with a pair of glasses or a headset.
Yeah, so there's a few interesting points to make here. So VR, one of the ways, there's obviously the headsets, and personally, I feel like the headsets are the technology for them isn't fully mature. There's too much lag. The resolution isn't high enough. You get that screen door effect. It would be a little bit more immersive if you can get a really wide kind of aspect ratio so it like wraps around and feels a bit more immersive that way.
Uh-huh.
But there's also a form of VR called a cave. And if you've ever been on a simulator based kind of ride at Disneyland or Universal Studios, if you've been on Star Tours or the Millennium Falcon ride at Disneyland, those are basically cave VRs. So instead of having a headset on and seeing through goggles, you are actually kind of surrounded on one or two or three or four sides by displays that are presenting like a virtual world to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, from your perspective as a user experience researcher and kind of strategist in this area, What is your just general take on these experiences up to this point? So what you've seen basically as of 2021.
Yeah. So I think that, well, for one thing, mixed AR is very much like you have overlays on the world. And that can be meaningful because you can do things like the glasses example that you had,
Uh-huh.
or the one of the ones that I think is really interesting is it can do live translation of text. So if you're traveling to Russia or China or somewhere that has especially a different language, but even a different alphabet,
Okay.
then it can translate their text and just overlay it so it looks like it's in space. Mixed reality is a little different because it's actually generating objects, virtual objects that interact with the real world. So within mixed reality, and this is one of the things that Magic Leap is kind of trying to do, is you can develop, like, if you imagine on your desk, you have this virtual ball in mixed reality, and you can roll it around and it would actually detect what objects are on your desk and have the ball bounce off of those objects.
Mm.
So it's a little bit more kind of a persistent real life thing. Now, I think that because of the different elements of those different technologies have different applications, like AR is ultimately it's a form of display, right? So it's getting information to you in ways that it can better integrate with what you're seeing in the environment. You can have, if you have really good image recognition, then you can identify plants and you can learn about them, or animals, or street directions, all those kinds of things. So you can kind of just get more aware of your environment. It's kind of like the Terminator view in Terminator 2. Like it's an information enhancement to the world. Mixed reality has an opportunity to go an extra level where you're introducing like storytelling elements or gamification at a higher level than you could with AR. So that I think is much further out in development, and a lot of that is ultimately software in order to get that really developed.
I think there's a huge opportunity here for, like you said, the enhancement, the education, like even areas like medical. One of the things I did was I did a little research on understanding kind of the market cap, and where the industry kind of thinks things are going to go. So, like Grandview Research reported this year that the market cap for AR could hit 340 billion by 2028, with these areas or segments of opportunity. So, aerospace and defense,
Mm-hmm.
automotive, education, e-commerce and retail, gaming and entertainment, healthcare, industrial and manufacturing. And then also kind of looking at the virtual reality market segment,
Mm-hmm.
thinking of they're around 15 billion as of 2020, but expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of about 18% per year from 2021 to 2028. So as this technology matures, these industries are looking for opportunities where this technology can help enhance their segment, right? And anytime I start feeling like that is what's happening, it's
Mm-hmm.
an indication to me that we're still in the phase of great technology or heading to great technology in search of a place for itself, like, or in search of a true problem, right?
Yeah.
And that always like kind of gets me going, like, okay, this is not really a strong investable space yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a space of like R&D.
Well, I think one of the reasons why AR gets so much attention is because the hardware for it is pretty much mature. It's just the software now catching up. So if you
True.
have, especially if you have basically a flagship smartphone, so any of the Galaxy phones, any of the iPhones, anything where you have multiple lenses on the back of the phone,
Hmm.
that is all you really need in order to provide a good AR experience, right? And we saw this with like Pokemon Go, and we see this with Snapchat and Instagram putting filters on people's faces, um, and a variety of different things. It's just now figuring out the best way to implement the software in order to meet the use cases. And I also think that people are still kind of looking at like, all right, where are the use cases that really make sense? And for me, I look at it, and you think about some of the the industries that you mentioned, retail, like online retail or even in-store retail is interesting, especially for like furniture shopping, for example, right? I think Amazon was doing this where you can find some furniture in a store and you can take it and look at what it would look like in your house. So you
Yeah,
can
it
get an
works really
idea of that.
well.
Yeah. And if you have a stereoscopic camera system, like in these phones, they can get a sense of depth and they can place it where it belongs in the room and they can make it look natural. The hardware is there, but other than e-commerce and retail and maybe a little bit of social and like putting like the dog ears on your face when you're Snapchatting with someone,
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of the applications are kind of outside of the commercial space. And you think about if you're an automotive mechanic and you're working on a car and your glasses that you could be wearing can tell you, okay, there's a leak coming out of this oil pump, and here is the type of oil pump that it is. Here's the model number based on image recognition, and while you're still under a car or the car's still up on a lift, you don't even have to necessarily go back to your computer and place the order for the replacement part or see if you have it in stock. Your AR enabled glasses could just tell you like, oh, well, we have 3 of those oil pumps laying around. Here's what the unit cost is. That
Yeah, I
kind of
think I
thing.
think the other side of that too. I mean, that's an amazing example because it's going to increase the speed in which you can do your job, right? It helps you be more efficient. But even taking it to the next level, maybe your eyes are not able to see what the system sees. So,
It's
for
true.
example, you have the glasses on and you're looking for a leak. Maybe you don't see the leak, but the glasses themselves detect the leak because it has a higher sensitivity to moisture or whatever it is, and it says, "Hey,
Yeah.
you should look in this area because this area looks like there might be something going on." I mean,
Yeah.
that's like that's like the dream, right, of this type of technology. But
Hmm.
it always kind of comes back to people saying, "Oh, I tried out that headset the other day and it was too heavy. It made my neck tired. I felt like I was blocked off from the world. I don't like being blocked off from the world when I'm working because what if someone walks into the room?" Like there are so many tiny little bits of things that need to be smoothed out and worked out for these experiences to be seamless and have wide scale adoption.
Well, I also wonder if that's one of the reasons why I wonder about like actual like consumer user adoption, right? Because I don't know that really going to get to the point where people are walking around with AR enabled glasses that are on all the time. Like I can imagine that they'll eventually get to the point where they can be built into normal sunglasses and eyeglasses so that you can have the AR capabilities.
Uh huh.
But I don't know how much people are going to want to have it turned on except in certain use cases. So it's if you're in that environment, if you're in that use case, then they can turn on. They might even be able to recognize like, oh, hey, you're in a museum now, or you're in a grocery store now, or you're at Home Depot and you need help finding where the specific item is.
Uh huh.
Then it could recognize that and start providing some AR support. But I don't know that if you're going to the park and just hanging out that you want this data shoved in your face.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then there's a big part of me, like especially as we're kind of like exiting out of COVID, where I have fatigue from the technology, right? I'm tired of
Mm-hmm.
lifting up my phone and responding to a message. I'm tired of that kind of stuff at the end of the day, right? Do I really want to go for my walk or my run or my bike ride and put on another pair of technology on my face so I can have even more information? I don't know the answer to that. I think it depends on how well it gets implemented. But I was thinking about this example you gave me about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, we were talking about this as, AR and VR were getting brought up again for like the fourth time.
Uh-huh.
And you said closed environments seem like the best place to do this. So you mentioned museums,
Oh
is
yeah.
that you put on these glasses, everything is dialed in for what's in the actual museum. So when you walk up to something, there's nothing on the screen, but then when you walk up to it, suddenly it says, "Oh, this dinosaur was alive during this period. This is what it's called. Do you want to hear how it's pronounced?" And then you tap it and suddenly it plays it into your ear, right? It actually enhances the education
Mm-hmm.
of the museum itself. And it makes me think that we're always trying to go away from those closed environments, but those are the best test beds to get the technology dialed in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was thinking about this for quite some time. For full disclosure to anybody listening out there, I am the type who, when I go through a museum, I want to read all the plaques. I want to know everything that's going on. That's probably not a surprise for anybody who knows me. But
Yep.
you can also imagine a situation where you go into an art installation somewhere, and it could be on the street, it could be in a museum, but you can have curated information be accessed through this AR system where you go to this. I believe there's a new Van Gogh exhibit in San Francisco right now. You can walk in and they already know what pieces of art you're going to look at, so they can kind of index in the background. All right, here's the different images you're going to be exposed to, and then we can curate experiences around seeing those images. And it can also kind of start piecing together elements of stories about Van Gogh's life. And another great example, I think, is if you go to the Disney Family Museum. They do an amazing job of storytelling throughout that entire museum of like, all right, this is when Walt was still in Kansas City, and this is when he first came out, and it came out to Hollywood, and this is what his experience was there, and this is when he did Mickey Mouse. And they take you through his life as you go through it. Now you can imagine having an extra layer on top so that if you have an AR enabled glasses on while you're going through the Disney museum, and you're seeing a little bit about, like you see an exhibit that's talking about the silly symphonies, then you can actually just bring it up and watch one or two of the silly symphonies on your AR glasses while you're standing there next to an exhibit talking about how they introduced color. Because you can curate, what they're going to be looking at, so you don't have to cover the wide spectrum. It makes image recognition much easier. You can even back it up with QR codes in the environment so that people know, the AR system knows, okay, this is what he's looking at, and here's the experience we can deliver at this point in time.
Yeah, and it seems like everyone is kind of getting into this space now to some extent, or at least I should say testing out in this space.
Mm-hmm.
I think people get really excited when they hear about the things that you're describing and they go like, oh, this company's doing that, or this company's doing this. But it's just part of R&D budget, and it's kind of a test, right? So like, let's talk about some of these companies that are actually investing in this space right now and really trying to think about it in the long term. So we have Nintendo, Qualcomm, Sony.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Sony's been messing with this stuff for a long time. I mean, like 20 years ago, I think Sony was playing around with this stuff. Yeah. Apple, Magic Leap, Facebook, Google. But I want to talk about two of these in particular. So Apple, there's been a rumor for a long time that they're going to do a head-mounted display AR glasses and that they're going to release something in 2022. To me, it makes a lot of sense because they have a very closed ecosystem and they can kind of control what you see and how it works. And I don't know what they have in mind or what they're thinking, but that one will be a really interesting one to see how it kind of unfolds. The other one I wanted to talk about was Google, because recent reports said that Google Cardboard is dead. I don't know if you remember that, but it was like the little cardboard set that you can put on your face by sliding in your Android phone. That they don't even offer it or sell it anymore. Daydream is kind of unknown. That was their VR headset that they're working on. I don't know what the current state of that is. I couldn't find too much information. AR measuring is dead. So they canceled the app where it was like an AR measuring tool. I don't know why they did that, but it seems to be based on kind of rumors and research that Google's Arc Core framework, which lets developers make augmented reality apps for Android and iOS, is heating up. So it's almost like they're doing what they do best, which is investing into the framework to allow other people to build and innovate on the platform.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about these different companies and kind of the rumors floating around about 2022 being the big year of AR?
Well, first thinking about Apple. So Apple's MO recently has to deliberately avoid being the first mover on a given product category, which is smart because they're probably looking at things and realizing, okay, well, the first mover advantage isn't what it used to be, right? You look around at the major companies in any given category, it's almost the dominant player right now is almost never the first to make it to market. And you can look at Google versus Yahoo. You can look at Facebook versus Friendster. There's plenty of examples of why that's true. So what Apple seems to do now is they wait for somebody else to kind of to pioneer it. They learn from that company's successes and mistakes, and they put out a much more polished version of it, and they do very well with that process. So I think that it wouldn't at all surprise me if Apple has um, an AR head-mounted display project in progress, but I think that they're waiting for somebody to kind of provide some market proof and some lessons learned in order to really finalize that and get it out. For Google, Google's much less interested in producing finished products, especially hardware products. That's one of the reasons why Cardboard was kind of their little test bed, little project, because it was never really designed or intended to be a finished product. It was just, let's put this out, let people play with it, see what we can learn from what people do with it. And hopefully somebody else will develop the hardware products and we can provide the back end. So AR Core is heating up. Another thing that gives them a real advantage in powering the back end in this is their image recognition technology is some of the best that's out there. I don't think there's another major company that really does anywhere near as well as they do. And you can try out Google Lens and get some preliminary AR experiences with like Translate, for example. You can bring up like some text in another language and have it translated for you in an AR experience, and it does a great job with it.
Got it.
And that technology is setting them a little bit forward from a software backend perspective of getting the image recognition is so important when it comes to AR.
Yeah, it just seems like all of this is in service of enhancing these phone experiences, or basically keeping up with the needs or use cases of these phone experiences, right?
Well, to some extent. So there's another company I would like to talk about within this range, and it's Disney. And I think people are overlooking them a little bit because they're an entertainment company more than they're like a tech company. They do a lot of tech, but I think within their culture, they're much more of an entertainment company. And if you go down to Disneyland right now, they've reopened. If you go down to Disneyland right now, you will see some AR or some VR experiences. Had one of the first VR experiences with Star Tours, and now they have several others, including the Millennium Falcon ride and a few others. But you can walk around Galaxy's Edge with your phone up, looking at certain things within the environment, and have an AR experience with some image recognition of certain things that are around. And it has a whole storyline about the like resistance versus the First Order and that kind of stuff going on. And I think Disney within their parks are really starting to work on this and figure it out as far from an entertainment and storytelling medium. And we're going to start seeing that leak out into the hotels, the resorts, the cruises. You're going to see like an extra layer of interactivity in a lot of their experiences.
Yeah, and that's another one of those situations where it's a closed environment. Like they can control everything that happens in that environment, which can basically perfect the technology to the point where people are like, I can't believe this is possible. And, that was so amazing, right? I think when you open it up to the general public and you allow, the average person to download an app and try it out at home or whatever it is, there's so many possibilities for the experience to be eroded for things you can't even predict or think about, in the lab setting. I can understand why these closed environments are so effective, basically, with people, and where the open environments are just much more challenging, unless you're kind of fixating on only one or two things. Like, for example, Disney released a AR app recently, where, as you put it on the ground and you're playing with some of the toys, you can kind of see like Mickey Mouse and that kind of stuff. And that stuff works great, but it's only for a very, specific use case, not like a broad use case like, oh, I'm going to overlay it on any tree that's in the yard. And it's going to tell me, what is the tree? Like, how do I water it? What is this discoloration on the leaves? Like, how do I fix it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's much, much, much more challenging. And I think is going to take a lot more time to have broad scale adoption and actually work 90+% of the time.
there is kind of an elephant in the room that we haven't really addressed yet also. And that is where I think this will have the biggest impact for markets in general is actually in logistics and shipping. Think about what it takes for somebody within like an Amazon fulfillment center of going and finding a product on their shelves and getting that moved to the right location. You start adding AR on top of it so that it can interact with another handheld device to go back and forth and scan and then figure out where it's going, and or even for delivery drivers in order to see, okay, I just drove up. Here's the product that I need to find in the back of my truck in order to drop off. Then it can make that entire process way, way more efficient.
Is this where you kind of see most of the investment and innovation probably going in the future when it comes to using this stuff?
Yeah, I think for logistics, creating an additional level of efficiency and productivity. I mean, you can have it for just e-commerce and retail. It can be effective in storefronts. It can be effective for the military when they are shipping supplies around. It can be really effective for getting perishable food supplies out to people in kind of a FEMA emergency situation. There's so many ways in which AR can introduce an extra level of just efficiency and helping to take care of things like going into like an area with perishable food goods and noticing and knowing like how long have those apples been sitting there and do we need to prioritize using them in the short term, that kind of thing. I think that can have some of the biggest effects that can come out of AR will be in that kind of productivity space.
Well, let's talk about some of these big key use cases because that's a great one to kick this off. So let's go back and circle back to shopping again. I came up with this interesting data use case that I thought we should address. So being able to try things on at home and not having to drive to the store and can do it all through kind of the e-commerce platform. I was thinking about the Warby Parker example that I talked about right when we first started the podcast. And I was thinking, if you had 100,000 people try on a pair of glasses on the Warby Parker app and then abandoned them, you get data that can be helpful for design and development, right? Because you're like, wow, I know all about these people. I know what they tried on, and I know that they abandoned these particular frames or glasses, right? But if you're going into the store and trying it on, and you have 100,000 people that walked into the store and they grabbed them off the shelf, put them on their face, looked in the mirror for a second, put them back down and walked out of the store, you don't have any of that data. So it doesn't help with design and development.
You might. I should point out there are strategies for getting data on that, but the reality is getting that data to scale. You're probably not going to have 100,000 people going into like a Warby Parker store at a given location, right? You can achieve much higher scale and much greater fidelity on the data by doing it virtually.
Exactly, right? So there's like these huge opportunities in shopping, and that's the area that really excites me the most. And you know, they're doing it with shoes, they're doing it with everything right now. So I think the next 5 years you're going to have a lot of amazing opportunities, and especially that one where you're talking about putting the furniture in your house. I've used that before, and it's crazy to be able to see your house and see that piece of furniture sitting in the corner, and you can make that decision. Like it's where I kind of wanted it to go. The next one is gaming and amusement parks, entertainment, basically. If you take a look at the hugely successful Pokemon Go, right? It was not only successful with like young kids, but adults and everyone else, right? So it was a fun, engaging application, or is a fun, engaging application that can get you outside in the real world, gets you to travel a little bit. Like we're here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I remember my son was like, "Oh, I want to go and find out if there's any Pokemon up in the Presidio." So we just drove up to the Presidio and walked around the whole Presidio near the Disney Museum up there. And we're collecting Pokemon and stuff. And it was just like a fun afternoon of lunch and doing that. So I see that area continuing to grow. And if you dial that experience in correctly, I think you will have huge rapid adoption like they've had with Pokemon Go.
Yeah, and I think you can take areas like Yosemite, for example, and develop entire like nature gaming experiences around that also have educational value.
Yes. And that would be leading into my next one, which is education, the one area that you've been kind of pushing on for quite a few years with museums and, like you said, like Yosemite and that kind of stuff. It is perfect for education. And I only see this area growing, but it does take a long time to get this type of technology into like the school system.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to see it more in areas where there's higher levels of funding, like national parks and things like that, where
Yeah.
they can just buy a slew of these sets, they clean them, they give them to the kids, and they give them back, right? But hey, if they can get these into the school and they can use them in science class, they can use them in um, other classes where you can help visualize information and adopt that information and store that information in your brain better, then it only helps everyone.
Yeah, and you can imagine it in certain like tech forward museum experiences, like the Tech Museum in San Jose or the Exploratorium in San Francisco, where you can just have an app running on your phone that connects to the AR glasses you pick up on your way in the door.
Yep.
And you can access more information or bookmark it to access it later on the app if you don't want to get too deep into it in the moment.
Exactly. And then the last area I had of real excitement and interest is travel. You were talking about being able to, overlay signs and things like that from different languages and everything. That's amazing. I mean, one of the major stressors of travel, especially going to a foreign country where you've never been before, is having to quickly try to learn the language a little bit to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will always kind of be the case. I think people enjoy trying to practice or learn languages, but being able to go up to a sign and say, I don't know what that says, and I haven't been able to figure it out. And then you just lift up your phone and suddenly it translates it and it says, museum to the right or whatever it is. It's just going to make travel more exciting. It's going to make it more accessible and it's going to make it less scary, especially if you're going to a country that you've never been before, or maybe you don't travel that often. And that is one of the things you're worried about. And maybe you won't have to be as worried now.
Yeah, and there are other very interesting things like navigation overlays. Like you remember when we were in Japan, they don't use named streets quite like we do. So they
No.
have everything's organized by districts and then subsets of those districts, and that's what they use in order to kind of to locate specific addresses. So also getting to the right train at the right time when you're traveling anywhere for glasses to be able to say, this is the train that you want and this is how much time you have to get there. That is so valuable when you're running late, or if you are time sensitive and you don't want to spend a bunch of time staring at like a train chart that's in another language to try to figure out which one you need to get to. That's hugely helpful.
So I want to talk a little bit about the social impact of wearing glasses that have information overlaid on them.
Mm-hmm.
We know what happened in 2010. People started wearing these Google glasses. They started becoming glass holes. There was all kinds of stuff happening in the industry. People didn't like being recorded. People didn't like knowing that your glasses, are potentially like analyzing them or looking at them. There was a lot of pushback socially because of this. You feel like here we are, 2021, heading into 2022. You still think that's an issue?
Well, I think there's a few things. Number one, Google Glasses were never, Google Glass, excuse me, was never
Glass,
really
yeah.
intended to be like a full-fledged product. It was kind of a technology demonstrator that people kind of demanded because there's a certain level of demand for the technology itself. And because of how much they cost, there was only a certain type of person who got them. And so I don't necessarily know that Google Glass made people into glass holes. I think maybe they were always glass holes, and Google Glass helped us to recognize that to some extent.
Yeah.
The other side of things is that because of the design of them at the time period, they were very what's the word? They were very prominent. They didn't blend in. They didn't look like they were a normal product that people would wear all the time. So I think if you accomplish that, it's a huge step in the direction that you need to go. It will take, I think, a little bit of time in order to get things miniaturized to the right point and to get the power figured out, the connectivity. But we're really close. One of the major applications for Google Glass was actually video recording through their camera. It's actually done pretty well. Especially, you start comparing it to kind of what GoPro looked like at the time.
Yeah.
and it did a great job. And that is a significant use case. I think socially people are a little bit more accepting of recording going on in the environment, especially nowadays when we've had all these examples of recordings of actual events being helpful. So not to bring up too much negativity, but when people are recording police interactions and they're worried about somebody reacting to them holding their phone up, if they can do it in a slightly more subtle way, then it could be helpful for them in that situation. But socially, I think that the idea of recording in public is a little bit more acceptable than it is now. But there's still going to be some people who are like, I want to make sure you're not recording me.
Yeah, we're always trying to figure out the timing, right? Because timing is really everything when it comes to innovation. There's a lot of, VR innovation that happened in 1989, right? And we still didn't get full scale adoption of it, right? So when I think about it, I look at, is the technology being kind of accepted? Are people excited about it? Okay. And then on top of that, I layer on, is there funding in the space? Meaning, is there enough money flowing around that you're actually going to build a product that can scale? What does the design look like? And then also, where are we with kind of like chip development? So one of the things that we recently heard, right, is that chips are getting smaller and faster. And by 2026, we should have some pretty amazing chip technology, right? If you basically apply all those things together, I could see about a 5 to 8 year time frame where we might have a product that everybody says, yeah, not everybody, but people who like technology says, yeah, I want to invest into one of these and I want to hold on to them. Maybe I can leave my phone at home and I'm just going to wear my glasses around for a while or something like that, right? So I think it's there, but it feels about 5 to 8 years out again.
I still kind of come back to, I don't know that this is really a consumer product in an everyday use. Like it probably can be and will be, but ultimately the applications I think are very situationally specific, right? So I think the biggest point where they're going to pick up is going to be in professional and enterprise use. So some logistics that we talked about, some medical would be really helpful, or dental, automotive repair, or other forms of maintenance and repair. I think those are going to be the primary use cases. For consumer level experiences, I think it'll be around specific environments or situations. I think the grocery stores or big box retailers are one of them, just to find the product that you're looking for within a big store. And the other is like specific situations, like you're traveling or you're in a theme park or you have some kind of game that you're playing or something like that. But I don't think it's like for just hanging around or just walking down the street. I don't think if you put in front of somebody's face what time it is at all times, I think their stress level is just going to go up.
Yeah, I mean, we even learned that in school when we were studying head-mounted displays back in the early 2000s, right? Through our education, that people's constant change of attention, right? If it's not done seamlessly and only with proper intention, as they change their attention constantly, it can be stressful, distracting, right? It has to really be done quite well. Snap technologies or Snapchat, right? They are building their glasses and they're thinking of a 5 to 10 year time frame, and they're only focusing on this technology for developers right now. So they're basically looking at it saying, we want developers to come in and try to build amazing technology with these glasses that we've developed. We're not even thinking consumer right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what Google was trying to do with Google Glass, right? They were putting it out to developers and creators because they wanted to just handle the back end. They didn't even necessarily want to deal with developing the hardware fully. They just wanted to kind of develop a lot of the software hooks into the hardware, maybe provide some hardware specification guidance, and then hand it over to some kind of OEM to develop it the rest of the way. So this is kind of Snap's equivalent to Google Glass. And one of the things that kind of communicates to me is they don't necessarily have a specific use cases in mind. They might at some level, but when you're handing it over to developers and creators to kind of experiment with, what you're hoping for is those creators to identify use cases and develop kind of strategies for addressing those use cases and then share them with you. And then you can direct your development into supporting those use cases.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's sounds to me like what they're trying to do. So with that said, I want to circle back to what we used to ask on the season 1 of our podcast as we kind of wrap up this episode. So if you were investing your money into a company because you want to be in the space of augmented reality, where would you put your money, D?
I mean, I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. I would. Ultimately, I think the companies that are developing these are going to develop them for themselves. And then potentially they'll put them out for other people. So I imagine Google's going to develop the back end. I think Amazon will have their own product for their own warehouses and fulfillment centers. I think at some point it'll make its way out to like UPS and FedEx and some companies like that. I mean, Disney will fold this into their other experiences. Beyond that, I wouldn't necessarily use the AR as a means to define investments. I would kind of look at their entire portfolio and see how they fit in. So, but I don't necessarily look at Magic Leap or a company that is focused on AR specifically as a means to invest in them. It's just definitely not Snapchat, right?
Yeah.
I would definitely be looking at kind of their fundamentals of how they're doing on their social product rather than an AR product, which we don't have any idea what the use case is going to be yet.
I agree with you. That's one of the things that came about was I couldn't think of a company where their primary focus is either augmented reality or virtual reality or mixed reality, any of the ones that we talked about, where I would say, yes, I'm all in. I want that in my portfolio. For me, it's more like if I want AR in my portfolio, I'm going to think of companies that I think are just going to weave it into their process, right? Quite well. Like you said, Disney, Nintendo, Apple, like I think they just have opportunities to do this where it becomes part of the bigger play, the bigger story. And that's kind of where I would think about it in this moment. Now, not to say that in a couple of years, some company might come out of the blue and have the most amazing experience ever, and it's all dialed into gaming or something, and everyone goes, yeah, I want in on that new gaming company. It's an AR gaming company only or a VR gaming company, and it's just killing it. But at this moment, it feels more like technology, not like a new industry or segment to focus on.
And I think that's the case. I think it's an enhancement for a lot of different segments, but I don't necessarily think that it's a standalone per se. I think if you were to ask me who is going to kind of be the leaders in this space, I think that Amazon is going to develop out platform, not even just a product. They're going to develop a platform that's designed for logistics, and they're going to use it for their warehouses, and they're eventually going to make it available for other logistics management for them to use, including companies like FedEx and UPS, maybe even the post office. And they might export that in the same way they did with AWS. And then when it comes to kind of the entertainment side, I think it's going to be Disney because they're going to be doing it within certain of these spaces. I don't necessarily tend to see Disney exporting their developments beyond their own work, but you might see some people being inspired, as people often are, by what Disney's doing in their resorts, in their hotels, in their parks, or even sometimes in the movie theaters, and copying them. So I think those will probably be the leaders in those specific categories. And then there are some other areas like automotive, medical, dental, where I have no idea who's going to be that company. I think that Magic Leap wants to be. I think that Microsoft with HoloLens is.
Oh, we didn't even talk about Microsoft. Yeah.
I think if I were to point to a current AR technology that I think is really interesting, it's kind of HoloLens. And they are bumping up against that mixed reality that is quite a bit more difficult. But because I think Magic Leap and HoloLens are kind of bumping up against mixed reality, I think it's going to take quite a bit longer for them to have an application. And for the time being, those are going to be kind of behind a development wall. We're not really going to see that as much.
Yeah. I agree. And there's so much more we could have even talked about, like what Facebook is doing and what other people are doing. But I think this is kind of a good like thinking around user experience and kind of where this technology is going. And I'm glad we had a chance to really do research in this space. We keep hearing it every 10 years. My joke always is every 10 years, VR, AR, and all that kind of stuff just comes back out again. Everyone gets all excited about it again. And then it gets, buried. And then 10 years later, it comes back again. At some point, it's going to come out and stay out, right? But yeah, Dee, this was fun. So thank you so much for listening to everyone. We will be posting links to the sources that we talked about or referenced on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast and the number one. If you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave your review on whatever platform you use. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you all next week.